Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And before I jump into today's topic, I just want to flag up that I have got a fan on in this room. It's at my feet, blowing air into my face. Now, I don't know how that's going to read over the microphone because I don't normally have a fan on when I'm filming. However, I do have my mic plugged into my computer and I can see the levels of sound that are being registered by the microphone. And when I'm not speaking, it doesn't appear that there's any sound being picked up. So I'm hoping that means that this can't hear the fan, or if it can, that it's at such a low volume that it won't be something that distracts from what we're talking about today. However, I am going to keep the fan on because it's very hot where I am, and I want to make this video without melting into a rather soggy puddle. We are going to be making do and mending, as they say. With that being said, let's hop into today's topic. So, I think it's fair to say that attempting to trace, comprehend and even reconstruct Shakespeare's creative process has been something that has gripped the interest of scholars and artists for centuries. Some have sought to use his dramatic product to flesh out his somewhat scanty biography, while others have focused on the potential source material or materials for his plays and how he may have gained access to it. The list simply goes on and on. But I think it's important to consider that Shakespeare was writing with his company in mind, this being the Lord Chamberlain's men and later the King's men. So he's got the actors before he puts quill to paper to shape the characters that they are going to be playing. I think it's understandable, perhaps even logical, that he might allow his knowledge of these real individuals, their appearance, personality, and particular performance strengths, to affect the way he writes his fictional people. So today, we're going to set Shakespeare to the side to look at the life and legacy of one of the performers that he wrote for. And although this one player will be the focus, I think that this exploration might in turn open up aspects of the man who wrote with him in mind. So, let's dive in. Shakespeare's comedic characters, the fools, clowns and rude mechanicals, are often the ones that the audience love the most. If we think about the Shakespeare play that, according to a study conducted between 2011 and 2016, was staged the most, which would be A Midsummer Night's Dream, if we then think about the principal falling role in that play, Nick Bottom, we look at him and we find an arrogant egomaniac, someone who constantly seeks to make himself the centre of attention, someone who believes himself to be far superior to all his friends. Frankly, much of the audience will find themselves celebrating when he awakes with an ass's head upon his shoulders, a change that he is unaware of, but one that makes his friends flee from him in fear. In his altered state, he becomes the vile thing that the enchanted Titania first looks upon and so falls in love with. Bottom is the literal and figurative butt of the joke in the world of the play. Nevertheless, a quick scroll through the extant posters from various productions indicates the importance, arguably the centrality of this storyline and character. Bottom also has the most lines in the play. We have cause, therefore, to say that he is the star of the show. The purpose of today's video is to look at the man who played him first, the individual for whom Bottom and countless other iconic comic roles were written. William, or Will, Kemp. We aren't sure when Will Kemp was born, to whom, or even where, although he may have had links to Kent. He was probably around his mid-20s when he can be connected with the Earl of Leicester's players. It was a good idea for prominent nobles to support entertainers, especially if they, as Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, did, sought to host Queen Elizabeth I at their homes, and or if they wanted to be able to provide the gift of entertainment to her in one of her palaces. Will Kemp's feats of clowning and tumbling seem to have been particularly enjoyed by the Earl because he chose to reward him with an individual payment of 10 shillings in May 1585. Will Kemp was also chosen as one of 15 players who would travel to the Netherlands when Leicester took up the post of General of the English forces in the Netherlands. One Thomas Doyley wrote a letter to Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, from Calais on the 12th of November 1585, which includes the following line, quote, "There remaineth in Dunkirk also Mr. Kemp, called Don Guillermo." Will's talents would earn him further financial gifts from his patron while he was with him in the Netherlands too. There is an account that claims that in January 1586, Sir Philip Sidney, who was Leicester's nephew, trusted Will to carry letters to his wife, Lady Sidney, but instead Will had delivered them to Lady Leicester, who we know better as Lettice Knowles. It's not clear if this was an act of incompetence or connivance. Perhaps it was intended to be a risky joke. Certainly, it caused embarrassment because Lady Leicester was discussed in this correspondence and not in glowing terms. So, with this in mind, perhaps Will would have been relieved by the arrival of another opportunity to join an entourage of a different employer. In May 1586, he travelled to the Danish royal court at Elsinore with the Danish ambassador. He was joined by 5 other instrumentalists and tumblers, including one George Bryan and one Thomas Pope. In 1592, Kemp, Bryan and Pope would be back in England and performing as part of the Lord Stranger's Men, which was the most successful playing company at the time. And then later, these same 3 men would also all join the Lord Chamberlain's Men. Will Kemp would be referenced in Thomas Nash's satirical pamphlet, An Almond for a Parrot from 1590. He is called Monsieur de Kemp, jestmonger and vicegerent general to the ghost of Dick Tarleton. Richard Tarleton had earned his fame as the clown of the Queen's men. It appears that following Tarleton's death in 1588, Will had filled the space left in the public consciousness for a comic performer to favour. Will's capers or merriments were being singled out as being worthy of applause in the title page of A Knack to Know a Knave. Martin Butler suggests that this, quote, indicates that in some plays he provided independent comic episodes, self-contained farcical skits with minimal integration into the surrounding action. Butler also points out that, quote, Kemp's other specialty was the jig, or comic afterpiece, a song and dance routine that was customarily performed at the end of a play by up to 5 actors led by the clown. At least 6 of Kemp's jigs had reached print by 1595, and he must have been responsible for more, of which we have no record. Will seems to have specialised in farcical physicality, which may be interesting for us to keep in mind for when later in the video we come to look at the parts that William Shakespeare wrote for him. In 1594, while Will's fame continued to grow and his comedic talents were gaining even more attention, the patron of his playing company, the Lord Strange, died. All of these players were going to have to seek out a new patron or patrons. Fortunately for Will, from that year, his new patron would be the cousin, and some say half-brother, of Queen Elizabeth herself. He was Henry Carey, Lord Hunsdon, and he had been made Lord Chamberlain of the household by the Queen in July 1585. It was from this appointment that Will's new company would take its name, the Lord Chamberlain's Men. This company performed at the Theatre and the Curtain in Shoreditch. The company, including Will, would perform at court over the Christmas period of 1595 going into 1596. And of course, it is as part of this company that Will would become connected to some of the most famous comic roles ever to be found in Shakespeare. In addition to the one that we have already discussed, Bottom in A Midsummer Night's Dream, a play which has been dated to between 1594 and 1596, Will is also connected to the following roles. He is connected to the letter-switching Costard in Love's Labour's Lost, which dates from 1594 to 5. Am I stretching things too far to point out that there is a similarity with Will's own letter-based mix-up which occurred back in 1586? Is it possible that he had recounted the tale of giving Lady Leicester those insulting letters about her, which were originally meant to go to the Lady Sidney? Had he laughed about it, or did it make him cringe? Or is the whole thing simply a coincidence? Will is also connected to Peter, the nurse's servant in Romeo and Juliet. Indeed, in the 1599 quarto printing of this play, one of the stage directions is given as "Enter Will Kemp." Is this a mark of how conflated character and performer were in the mind of William Shakespeare? Or just in the view of those who had chosen to prepare this play for publication at this time? Will played the witty employer-swapping clown Lancelot in The Merchant of Venice from 1596. He was the officious but incompetent Dogberry in Much Ado About Nothing from 1598. To my mind, there are lots of obvious similarities between these roles. These are talkative characters who, in many cases, mix up their big words. These are characters with lots of opportunity to display physical humour and innuendo. These are not noble characters who will be allowed to display a sophisticated, rhetorical, word-playing wit, or alternatively held up for ridicule because of how inept they are to manage the requirements of their birthright. Instead, Will Kemp's clowns are earthy servants who veer between being figures that the audience laughs with and at. To do these roles justice, I would argue, takes sustained energy, impeccable timing, a highly attuned physical skill set, a willingness to improvise, and a capacity to connect directly with an audience. When I try to imagine a more contemporary version of Will Kemp, I keep coming back to Lee Evans, and I wonder if you know what I mean by that and if you can see it as well. And now I've said that, I probably also have to wonder how well known Lee Evans will be outside of the UK. So if that's a reference that is just not reading, then I apologise, and maybe you can check him out and see if you agree with me. There are also a couple of roles which Will Kemp has been connected to in a more contested or queried fashion. Some scholars have argued that he inspired and performed as the punning, word-confusing servant Lance in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, which was performed, we think, between 1590 and 1591. So this is a very, very early play. But he's also connected with that later bad influence on Prince Hal, the prideful and drunken knight Sir John Falstaff, who appears in the two parts of Henry IV and also in The Merry Wives of Windsor. And all of these three plays were performed between around 1596 and 1598. In the case of Falstaff, playing a knight would seem to be a departure from Will Kemp's usual roles. He is also a character with more emotive potential than those that Will Kemp usually played, and he does also lack some of the boisterous physicality that seems to have been somewhat of a trademark. Perhaps, of course, this was just Will's chance to show his range. Is this the matured or maturing clown looking for a performative challenge? By the end of the decade, Will and his company were in the market for a new location for their playing. This one would be south the river and would come to be called the Globe. It is a mark of Will's place within this company that he was invited to invest in the building of the Globe with a promise of a share in the profits. James Neilson points out, quote, "When the lease for the site of the Globe Theatre was signed on the 21st of February 1599, one of the partners in the new enterprise, along with Shakespeare and the actors Phillips and Hemmings, was William Kemp, who had been the clown of the Chamberlain's men since the company's formation in 1594. Shortly after the lease was signed, however, Kemp's share in the venture was made over to the other partners, and it has generally been assumed that he left the company at this time." The idea that Will Kemp parted company with the Lord Chamberlain's men in around 1599 is supported by a few other pieces of circumstantial evidence. The Lord Chamberlain's men had performed Ben Jonson's Every Man in His Humour in 1598, and Will Kemp was listed as one of the principal players in that production when the folio of the play was published. Kemp had taken the role of the talkative water-bearer Cobb. However, Kemp was not included in the list of players in the folio edition of Every Man Out of His Humour, which was thought to have been performed in either 1599 or 1600. Additionally, perhaps more tenuously, if Will had been the performer who was intended to play Falstaff, perhaps that might have contributed to Shakespeare's decision to have that character mentioned and mourned rather than have him appearing on stage in Henry V, a play which is thought to date to 1599 as well. Additionally, when in Hamlet, which is dated to 1600, the eponymous lead of that play directs the playing company in Act 3, Scene 2, he says the following, quote, "And let those that play your clowns speak no more than is set down for them. For there be of them that will themselves laugh to set on some quantity of barren spectators to laugh too, though in the meantime some necessary question of the play be then to be considered. That's villainous, and shows a most pitiful ambition in the fool that uses it." Was this intended to be a parting barb at Will's expense? It may well be that Will and the Chamberlain's men did not part on good terms, because after all, he chose to sell his share in the Globe rather than hold on to it, and thus have his claim of a share of the future profits. So, is this a sign of someone who is just keen to cut all ties with his former colleagues? Had he perhaps been forced out of the company by their jealousy? Or was Will Kemp simply desperate to fund his solo project? On the 11th of February 1600, Will Kemp sets off on his 9 days' wonder. In this, he would Morris dance the 130 miles from London to Norwich. The journey would take him a month. Interestingly, during this time, Will referred to himself on occasion as the Lord Chamberlain's servant, which might indicate that it was his plan to return to his playing company. Or alternatively, it may simply speak to a desire for this performer to conjure an impression of noble protection as he made his itinerant way across the country. Kemp took wages from those who thought that he would not succeed in dancing the whole way, and to further his financial recompense yet more, Will also published a pamphlet that recounted all the details of his great adventure. Will would dedicate his account to the true ennobled lady and his most bountiful mistress, Mistress Anne Fitton, maid of honour to the most sacred maid, Royal Queen Elizabeth. This is odd, because I don't know of an Anne Fitton. There was, however, a very prominent Mary Fitton in the Queen's household, and interestingly, Mary Fitton is one of the candidates who has been suggested as the figure of the Dark Lady who features in Shakespeare's sonnet cycle. Nevertheless, in his dedication, Will also states that his intention is to make enough money from this ordeal, adventure, trial, to fund him as he embarks upon a trip across the continent to Rome, on which he intends to perform as he goes. He did make it to Rome, but he would be forced by, quote, misfortunes, to return to England by September 1601. Some have suggested that Will returned to his company after he'd completed the 9 days' wonder, or if not then, that he had gone back to them after he spent that time on the continent. But in either case, there is little to substantiate that. Indeed, Will Kemp would be borrowing money from Philip Henslowe in the March of 1602, which was a few months after Will had joined Henslowe's playing company, Worcester's Men. However prominent Will was in this company, however fortunate he felt himself to have been selected to be paid to play at court at New Year 1602, Will's earning potential would have been a fraction of what he might have expected had he still been a sharer in the Globe. So, perhaps we have to confront the question, was Will Kemp every bit as impetuous, proud, even self-sabotaging as some of the characters that he played, the roles that Shakespeare had written for him? Will Kemp's last years are as obscured as his first years. So, he may have been the Kemp, a man, who is referenced as having been buried at St Saviour's in Southwark on November the 2nd, 1603. However, Catherine Duncan-Jones has found an alternate and conflicting reference to a payment that was made to William Kemp, my Lady Hunsdon's man, which happened in November 1610. And this, of course, means that Will must have still been alive at this point in 1610, and also that he could claim his former patron's widow as his current protector. If we want to figure out when he might have died, Charles William Wallace points out that Kemp is referred to as defunctus, meaning deceased, in a lawsuit from 1615 over shares in the Globe. As a side note, this lawsuit was brought by the widow of William Ostler, who also happened to be the daughter of William Ostler's fellow player, John Hemmings. And when Hemmings attempted to take on his former son-in-law's shares after his death, he was sued by his daughter. And it's not clear how this all ended up, but it certainly must have made Sunday dinner awkward. So what do you think? Do you think an exploration of Shakespeare's actors can be used to tell us about the playwright and his way of working? Should I give other members of the company a similar look? And if so, who should I start with? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video, or you can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box, so follow me over on some or all of them so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, why not share it with your friends? Please also let me know you liked it by hitting the thumbs up, and please subscribe to the channel if you think you're subscribed. I know I say this every week. It's now time to have a little check. Just make sure that YouTube hasn't mysteriously unsubscribed you, because every week in my comment section I have somebody saying, I'm glad I checked because I was unsubscribed. Don't let that be you. While you're there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, you can also hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down menu so that YouTube will allegedly tell you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.